Don't lie to me. I know exactly what you did. You think that badge gives you immunity?
Sir, I follow protocol. I'm just doing my job. This isn't right.
You made yourself the villain tonight, and this is gonna cost you.
The Florida sun was already a physical presence at 7 a.m., pressing down with a humid weight that promised a sweltering day. Inside the cool, antiseptic confines of Polk County Fire Rescue Station 4, paramedic Liam O'Connell was running through his morning checklist. The rig, a gleaming fortress of red and white, was stocked, cleaned, and ready. Every vial of medication was accounted for, every bandage roll in its place, every battery on the cardiac monitor showing a full charge. For Liam, a man who had built his life on a foundation of preparedness, this ritual was as essential as his morning coffee. At 42, with 15 years on the job and a 6-year stint as a Navy corpsman before that, he had seen enough chaos to know that the only defense against it was relentless, meticulous order. His partner, Maria Flores, a 10-year veteran whose calm demeanor was the perfect counterbalance to his quiet intensity, was logging their supply levels into the tablet. They worked in a comfortable silence, a language developed over 5 years of sharing 24-hour shifts, of witnessing birth, death, and the fragile, messy spectrum in between. They had seen the worst of humanity and its breathtaking best, often within the same hour. Today, a Sunday, felt different, slower, a deceptive calm that often preceded the storm. The alarm shattered the quiet at 8:12 a.m. The electronic voice, devoid of emotion, recited the details. Rescue 4, respond to a medical emergency. 1138 Cypress Lane. 62-year-old male, altered mental status, possible diabetic event. Timeout 0812. Liam was already moving toward the engine bay, his mind sifting through protocols. Altered mental status could mean anything from low blood sugar to a stroke. Cypress Lane was in a dense suburban neighborhood, tight streets, and morning traffic starting to build with churchgoers and brunch seekers. Maria was right behind him, tablet in hand, reading off the supplemental dispatch notes. Wife is the caller. States he's a known diabetic, took his insulin but hasn't eaten. Became confused and then unresponsive. Classic hypoglycemia, Liam said, settling into the driver's seat and firing up the engine. The diesel engine rumbled to life, a familiar roar that was the soundtrack to his career. He pulled out of the bay, lights flashing but siren off for now to keep the peace in the residential streets. Every second counted, but panic was a luxury they couldn't afford. His job was to bring order to chaos, not add to it. The drive was short, just under 4 minutes. They found the address easily, a modest, single-story home with a perfectly manicured lawn and a flamingo statue by the mailbox. A woman in her early 60s, her face etched with worry, was waving frantically from the open doorway. Liam parked the ambulance directly in front of the house, positioning it to block the lane of traffic. It was standard procedure, creating a protective bubble around the scene, ensuring no passing car could drift too close and injure them, the patient or a bystander. This fend-off position was drilled into every first responder. It saved lives. He grabbed the primary medical kit and the glucometer while Maria brought the stretcher. "Ma'am, I'm Liam. This is Maria. We're paramedics. Where is he?" he asked the woman, his voice calm and reassuring. "In the living room," she sobbed, leading them inside. He just collapsed." The living room was dim, the curtains drawn against the morning heat. A man was slumped in a recliner, his breathing shallow and rapid, his skin pale and clammy. He was unconscious but moaning softly, a neurological response to a brain starved of sugar. Liam didn't hesitate. He dropped to one knee beside the recliner, his fingers immediately going to the man's wrist. "Pulse is tachycardic and thready," he announced to Maria, who was already setting up the oxygen. "Skin is diaphoretic. Let's get a blood sugar." He pricked the man's finger, squeezed a drop of blood onto the test strip, and inserted it into the glucometer. The device beeped. The screen flashed a number that made his breath catch. 28. Dangerously low. A healthy reading was between 80 and 120. A reading of 28 meant the man's brain was shutting down. They were in a race against permanent brain damage, or worse. "Okay, I need an IV. Let's push D50, Liam said, his hands already moving with practiced efficiency. Maria had the IV kit ready. He tied a tourniquet around the patient's arm, expertly found a vein, and slid the catheter in. A perfect first stick. As he worked to secure the line, he could hear the faint sound of another engine approaching. Probably police, he thought. Standard procedure for unresponsive medical calls. They'd handle traffic, maybe help them with the lift. It was all part of the familiar, coordinated dance of an emergency scene. The patient was his world, the only thing that mattered. Everything else was just background noise. He was about to connect the syringe of dextrose, the concentrated sugar that would pull this man back from the brink, when a shadow fell across the doorway. The man standing in the doorway was silhouetted against the bright morning sun. He was young, probably not yet 30, with a haircut that was military sharp and a uniform so crisp it looked like it had been starched into submission. The Polk County Sheriff's Office patch was stark on his sleeve. His name tag read, E. Riley. He stood there for a moment, his hand resting on his duty belt, his eyes sweeping the scene not with the practiced assessment of a fellow first responder, but with the territorial gaze of someone taking inventory of his domain. "What's the situation?" he asked. His voice was sharp, carrying an edge of impatience that felt out of place in the quiet urgency of the room. Liam didn't look up. His entire focus was on securing the IV line and administering the life-saving medication. "Paramedic O'Connell, Polk County Fire Rescue. 62-year-old male, severe hypoglycemic event. We're administering D50 now." He spoke in the clipped professional shorthand common to emergency scenes. Deputy Riley stepped into the room, his boots making a heavy sound on the tile floor. He glanced at the patient, then his eyes fixed on Liam. "I need you to move your vehicle," he said. It wasn't a request. Liam paused for a fraction of a second, the syringe of dextrose in his hand. The command was so dissonant with the reality of the situation that his brain took a moment to process it. Maria, who was monitoring the patient's airway, looked up, a frown creasing her brow. The patient's wife, who had been hovering by the kitchen door, looked confused. "Deputy, I'm in the middle of treating a critical patient," Liam replied, his voice still even. "My vehicle is positioned for scene safety, blocking the lane." "It's blocking the whole damn street," Riley countered, his tone escalating. "I can't get my patrol car through. Move it now, that's an order." Liam pushed the first 25 milliliters of D50 into the IV line. The thick, sugary fluid was medicine. He could already see a subtle change in the patient's pallor. This was the most critical phase. Stopping now would be malpractice. "Sir, with all due respect, my partner and I are the only medical personnel here. We can't stop treatment. The ambulance stays where it is until the patient is stabilized and ready for transport. That is our protocol." He wasn't being insubordinate. He was stating a fact, a core principle of emergency response. The safety of the scene and the continuity of patient care were paramount. Any cop with a month of road experience would understand that. But Deputy Riley wasn't listening. He saw a paramedic questioning a direct order. In his world, that was a line that couldn't be crossed. "Your protocol doesn't override a lawful order from a peace officer," Riley said, stepping closer. His shadow now fell over Liam and the patient. "I'm not telling you again, go move that ambulance." The patient, Mr. Henderson, began to stir. The dextrose was reaching his brain. He groaned, his eyelids fluttering. It was a good sign, a sign that they were winning. "He's coming around," Maria said softly, her focus entirely on the man in the chair. Liam looked up at Riley for the first time, making direct eye contact. He tried to project calm, to de-escalate. "Deputy, look at the patient. He's responding. We need another minute to finish treatment and get him on the stretcher. Then we can clear the road. His life is the priority right now, not where your car is parked." He thought the evidence of their work, A man literally coming back from the edge of a diabetic coma would be enough. He was wrong. For Deputy Riley, the scene was no longer about a medical emergency. It had become a test of wills, a challenge to his authority in front of witnesses. His jaw tightened, a muscle flexing in his cheek. He had been a deputy for 3 years, and in that time, he had learned that the uniform and the badge were supposed to grant him immediate compliance. He wasn't used to being told no, especially not by a medic. "I don't care about your patient right now," Riley snapped, his voice rising. "I care about you following my orders. You're obstructing my investigation." "Investigation into what?" Liam asked, genuinely baffled. "This is a medical call. There's no crime here." The question seemed to enrage Riley further. It was another challenge, another refusal to simply obey. He unclipped the radio from his shoulder. "Dispatch, show me on scene at 1138 Cypress. I have an uncooperative paramedic obstructing my arrival." His words, broadcast over the county-wide channel, were a clear escalation, a public declaration. He was drawing a line in the sand. Liam O'Connell had just become the problem. The transmission crackled over the airwaves, a piece of calculated theater designed to frame the narrative. By calling Liam uncooperative, Deputy Riley had officially defined the encounter not as a medical response, but as a law enforcement issue. Liam felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He'd dealt with difficult officers before, cops on a power trip, rookies who were nervous, veterans who were jaded. But this was different. This felt personal and dangerously unpredictable. Mr. Henderson moaned again, a more coherent sound this time. His eyes opened, unfocused and confused, but open. The dextrose was working its magic. "Sir, can you hear me? You're okay. You had a diabetic emergency," Liam said, his voice dropping back into its soothing, professional register. He ignored Riley for a moment, his duty to his patient overriding everything else. He pushed the remaining D50 into the line. "Hey, are you deaf?" Riley's voice boomed in the small living room. "I'm talking to you. Get up and move the ambulance." Liam disconnected the empty syringe and began taping down the IV line to secure it for transport. He spoke without looking up, his focus absolute. "In about 30 seconds, my partner and I are going to move him to the stretcher. As soon as he is safely in the ambulance, I will gladly move the vehicle. Until then, my priority is the man whose life I'm trying to save." He could feel Riley's anger radiating like heat off asphalt. It was irrational, it was unprofessional, and it was escalating at an alarming rate. Maria, sensing the shift, positioned herself slightly between the patient and the deputy, a subtle, protective gesture. "That's it. I've had enough of your attitude," Riley said, taking another step forward until he was towering over Liam. "Give me your driver's license and your paramedic certification, now!" "They are in my wallet, in my pocket," Liam said, still taping the line. "I can't get them for you right now." To do so would mean stopping his work, turning his back on his patient, and digging through his pockets while kneeling on the floor. It was an absurd demand. "So you're refusing to identify yourself?" Riley's voice dripped with feigned disbelief. He was building his case, brick by imaginary brick. Uncooperative, refusing to identify, obstructing. "I identified myself the moment you walked in. I am paramedic Liam O'Connell, and I am performing my legal and ethical duty to provide medical care," Liam said, his own patience wearing thin. He finally looked up, his gaze steady. "Deputy, you are interfering with a medical procedure. I'm asking you professionally to please step back and allow us to do our job. We can sort out any issues you have after the patient is cared for." For a moment, there was a tense silence. The only sounds were Mr. Henderson's ragged breathing and the crackle of the police radio on Riley's shoulder. The patient's wife stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. She had called 911 for help, and now her living room had become the stage for a bizarre power struggle. Riley's face was flushed. The veins on his neck stood out. He had been publicly challenged, and his ego, brittle and oversized, couldn't withstand it. He made a decision. It wasn't a decision based on law or protocol or public safety. It was a decision born of pure, unadulterated anger. Fine. You want to do this the hard way? Riley reached down and grabbed Liam's arm, his fingers digging into the muscle. The movement was sudden and aggressive. Liam's medical kit, which was on the floor beside him, was knocked over, its contents spilling across the rug. "Don't touch me," Liam said, his voice low and firm. He didn't pull away, knowing that could be twisted into resisting. He remained perfectly still. "You're under arrest," Riley snarled, his face inches from Liam's. "Under arrest for what?" Liam asked, the question laced with incredulity. "For doing my job?" "Assault on a law enforcement officer," Riley said, the words hanging in the air, thick and poisonous. "You shoved me with your bag when I approached. I gave you a lawful order and you assaulted me." The lie was so blatant, so utterly disconnected from reality, that Liam was momentarily speechless. He hadn't shoved anyone. He hadn't even moved. The deputy had initiated all the physical contact. Maria gasped. "That's not true. He didn't do anything. You're the one who grabbed him." Riley ignored her. His world had narrowed to a single objective: winning. He tightened his grip on Liam's arm and began to pull him up. "Stand up. Put your hands behind your back." "Let go of me," Liam said, the ice in his voice now carrying a warning. "My patient is still critical. He needs to be transported. You are abandoning this patient." But Deputy Riley was beyond reason. He had committed to a course of action, and he would see it through, no matter how destructive. He yanked harder, forcing Liam to his feet, away from the man he was treating. The IV line, still attached to Mr. Henderson's arm, was pulled taut. For a terrifying second, it looked as if it would rip out. Maria lunged forward and deftly disconnected the bag, saving the line but halting the flow of any further medication or fluids. The critical link between paramedic and patient had been severed by an act of pure, ego-driven madness. The metallic click of the handcuffs locking around Liam's wrists echoed in the silent living room. It was a sound of finality, a sound that transformed a respected medical professional into a criminal suspect in less than a second. The cold steel bit into his skin. He stood there stunned, his mind struggling to reconcile the surreality of the moment with the 15 years of service he had dedicated to saving lives. He had been in dangerous situations before, under fire in Afghanistan as a corpsman, in the middle of violent domestic disputes, at the scene of horrific car crashes. But he had never felt as vulnerable as he did now, disarmed and humiliated in a quiet suburban home for a crime he didn't commit. "You can't do this," Maria pleaded, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and rage. She had taken over the patient's side, her hands hovering over Mr. Henderson, whose brief period of consciousness was fading. His eyes had rolled back, and his moans were growing weaker. The sudden stop in treatment was having a visible effect. "Look at him! He's crashing again! He needs to go now!" Deputy Riley didn't even glance at the patient. His focus was entirely on Liam. He saw not a paramedic, but a subject who had defied him. The fabricated assault was his justification, the key that unlocked his ability to use force and restore his perceived authority. "He assaulted an officer. He's going to jail," Riley stated flatly, as if it were the most logical outcome in the world. He patted Liam down roughly, a performative search for weapons he knew weren't there. "This is insane," Liam said, his voice a low growl. He forced himself to remain calm, to think clearly. Every word, every action was now being recorded by the body camera on Riley's chest. His own defense would begin right here. "Deputy Riley, I am formally stating for the record that I did not assault you. I did not touch you. You are arresting me under false pretenses and are directly responsible for the delay in this patient's medical care. You are causing harm." Riley shoved him toward the front door. "Just keep talking. It'll all be in my report." The threat was clear. My word against yours, and my word is the one that gets written in an official document. As he was marched out of the house and into the blinding Florida sunlight, Liam saw the neighborhood through a different lens. A few neighbors had come out onto their lawns, drawn by the sight of a police car and an ambulance. They were now witnessing a paramedic being led away in handcuffs. The humiliation was a physical blow. His reputation, built over a decade of service in this community, was being dismantled in real time by a lie. He was pushed against the hot metal of the patrol car's hood. Riley's hands were rough as he tightened the cuffs, making them dig deeper into his wrists. "What is your name and date of birth?" Riley asked, beginning the formal booking process as if this were a routine traffic stop. Liam looked past him, back toward the house. He saw Maria through the open doorway, frantically working on Mr. Henderson alone. She was trying to get him onto the stretcher by herself, a nearly impossible task with a man of his size. The patient's wife was weeping, her hands clasped over her face in utter despair. This was the consequence of Riley's ego, a scene in chaos, a patient in peril, and a family traumatized. "My patient needs another unit," Liam said, his voice strained. "My partner can't transport him alone. You need to call for another ambulance right now." "I'll handle it," Riley said dismissively. He pulled open the rear door of his patrol car and pushed Liam inside. The back seat was hard plastic, molded for discomfort and compliance. The air was thick and stale. The door slammed shut, and the world became a cage of plexiglass and metal mesh. He watched as Riley sauntered back toward the ambulance, not to help, but to look inside, as if searching for some other violation. He saw Riley pick up the tablet Maria had been using and stare at it, as if he had any right to view a patient's private medical information. The arrogance was breathtaking. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Riley got on his radio. "Dispatch, the suspect is in custody. Send another rescue unit to this location to assist with transport. The primary paramedic has been arrested for assault on LEO." The words were a public branding. Every cop and firefighter listening to the radio in Polk County just heard that one of their own, a senior paramedic, had been arrested for assaulting a sheriff's deputy. The lie was spreading, hardening into official record with every passing second. Inside the stifling heat of the patrol car, Liam O'Connell closed his eyes. The fight for his patient's life had ended. The fight for his own had just begun. The drive to the Polk County Sheriff's Central Booking Facility was a 10-minute journey through hell. Liam sat in the back of the patrol car, the vinyl seat sticking to his uniform in the oppressive heat. Deputy Riley drove in silence, occasionally glancing at him in the rearview mirror with a look of smug satisfaction. The radio crackled with the mundane chatter of a Sunday morning, a stark contrast to the calamitous turn Liam's own morning had taken. He tried to focus on his breathing, a technique he'd learned in the Navy to stay calm under pressure. Inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4. But the rage and disbelief were a toxic cocktail churning in his gut. He thought of Mr. Henderson. Had the second ambulance arrived in time? Was Maria okay having to manage that scene alone after witnessing her partner's arrest? He felt a profound sense of helplessness, a feeling he wasn't accustomed to. His entire life was about taking action, solving problems, imposing order on medical chaos. Now, he was just cargo, stripped of his ability to help, his fate in the hands of the arrogant young man in the front seat. They arrived at the booking center, a sterile, imposing concrete building that smelled of disinfectant and despair. Riley led him out of the car and through a set of heavy steel doors. The controlled chaos of the intake area hit him immediately. Phones ringing, officers talking, the clanging of cell doors in the distance. Several deputies looked up as he was brought in, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and surprise. A paramedic in uniform and handcuffs was not a common sight. Riley shoved him toward the booking desk, where a portly, gray-haired sergeant sat behind a high counter, peering over a pair of reading glasses. The sergeant's name tag read Miller. He was a veteran, with the weary, all-seeing eyes of a man who had spent 30 years watching the dregs of society cycle through his facility. He looked at Liam, then at Riley, and his eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. "What do you have here, Riley?" Sergeant Miller asked, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. Arrested for assault on a law enforcement officer and obstruction, Riley announced, his chest puffed out. This is the paramedic from the Cypress Lane call. Miller's gaze lingered on Liam's uniform, the Polk County Fire Rescue patch on his sleeve, the paramedic insignia on his collar. He'd seen Liam before, bringing in patients from the field, always professional, always calm. He looked at the angry, flushed face of the young deputy standing beside him. Miller had seen that look 1,000 times, too. It was the look of a cop who had let a situation get personal. Assault on an LEO? Miller repeated slowly, taking off his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. What happened? He hit you? He shoved me with his medical bag when I ordered him to move his ambulance, Riley said, reciting the lie he had constructed. Refused to identify himself, became belligerent. Liam remained silent, as he knew he should. Anything he said could and would be used against him. He just stood there, meeting the sergeant's gaze, letting the man draw his own conclusions. Miller looked from Riley's pristine uniform, which showed no sign of a struggle, to Liam's exhausted, sweat-streaked face. He'd processed thousands of assault cases. He knew what they looked like. This wasn't it. Okay, Miller said, his tone non-committal. Put him in processing. The next hour was a blur of institutional humiliation. Liam was ordered to remove his shoelaces and his belt. His pockets were emptied. His wallet, containing his driver's license and the paramedic certifications Riley had demanded, was placed in a plastic bag. The booking officer logged his possessions with bureaucratic indifference. Then came the fingerprints, the cold black ink staining his fingers, the same fingers that had found a pulse and started an IV just an hour earlier. He was told to stand against a wall for his mugshot, a harsh flash of light capturing his image at the lowest moment of his professional life. Through it all, he held on to his composure. He answered the booking officer's questions calmly and respectfully. He complied with every instruction. He would give them no ammunition, no reason to add uncooperative to the growing list of false charges. As he was being led toward a holding cell, Sergeant Miller called out from the desk. "Hey, O'Connell!" Liam stopped and turned. "Your union rep has been called," Miller said quietly. "Lawyer's on the way." It was a small gesture, a simple relaying of information. But in the cold, impersonal world of the precinct, it felt like a lifeline. It was an acknowledgement from someone on the inside that this situation was not normal, that he wasn't just another number. Sergeant Miller had seen the pieces, and he knew they didn't fit. The first crack in Deputy Riley's official story had appeared, not in a courtroom, but in the knowing eyes of a veteran cop who could smell a lie from across a booking desk. Liam gave a slight nod of thanks, and was then led into a concrete cell. The heavy door slammed shut, the sound of the lock echoing his new reality. While Liam O'Connell sat on a cold concrete bench in a holding cell, Deputy Evan Riley was in a small, windowless office, hunched over a keyboard. He was composing the official narrative, the document that would serve as the state's sole version of events. The arrest and probable cause affidavit was more than just a report. It was a sworn statement, a legal instrument that could end a man's career, strip him of his freedom, and brand him a felon. And Riley was treating it not as a document of fact, but as a work of fiction. He typed with a methodical confidence, his fingers dancing across the keys as he wove his fabrication into the rigid template of the form. He began with the basics: time, date, location. Then he moved to the narrative section, the heart of the document, where his version of reality would be enshrined. On the aforementioned date and time, he wrote, I responded to a medical call at 1138 Cypress Lane. Upon arrival, I observed a Polk County Fire Rescue Ambulance, number 4, blocking the entire roadway, preventing my access to the scene. I made contact with the primary paramedic, later identified as Liam O'Connell, who was inside the residence. So far, it was close enough to the truth. But then, the story began to pivot. I gave the defendant, O'Connell, a lawful order to move his vehicle so I could secure the scene. The defendant immediately became argumentative and belligerent, stating in a loud voice, I'm not moving my truck for you. He refused to acknowledge my authority as a law enforcement officer. This was the first calculated lie. Liam had never raised his voice, never said those words. His tone had been firm but professional. Riley was painting him as insubordinate from the first moment of contact. He continued, adding layers of detail to make the fiction more plausible. I again ordered the defendant to cease his obstruction and move his vehicle. In response, the defendant turned aggressively toward me, puffing out his chest and stated, "You need to leave." Fearing for my safety and the safety of the civilians present, I attempted to de-escalate, asking the defendant for his identification. He refused, stating, "You're not getting anything from me." Another complete invention. Liam had explained exactly where his ID was and why he couldn't get it at that moment. But Riley's report transformed this explanation into a defiant refusal. The puffing out his chest detail was a masterstroke of deceit, a classic descriptor used to imply impending physical aggression. Now came the climax of his story, the moment he would justify the handcuffs. As I approached the defendant to give him a final warning, he picked up his large, heavy medical kit and intentionally shoved it into my chest, striking me and causing me to stumble backward. This act constituted a battery on a law enforcement officer. At this point, given the defendant's escalating aggression and the physical assault, I had no choice but to place him under arrest to restore order and secure the scene. He read the sentence over, satisfied. It was perfect. It shifted all blame, framed him as the victim, and painted Liam as a violent, unstable aggressor. He made sure to add a final sentence about the patient. After the defendant was secured, I immediately called for another rescue unit to ensure the patient received care, which had been delayed by O'Connell's criminal actions. This masterfully twisted the narrative, suggesting that it was Liam, not his own actions, that had endangered the patient. He printed the document, the ink still warm, and signed his name at the bottom, right below the line that read, "Under penalty of perjury, I swear the foregoing is true and correct." With that signature, Evan Riley had done more than file a police report. He had committed a felony. Perjury was a serious crime, but in his mind, it was a necessary one. He had been challenged, and he had won. The report was his trophy. He felt no guilt, no flicker of conscience. He felt only the satisfying certainty that he had protected the most important thing on that scene, his own authority. He dropped the report into the basket for the state attorney's office. It would be reviewed in the morning, and formal charges would be filed. The system was now in motion, a massive impersonal machine grinding forward, powered by his lies. He walked out of the office, grabbed a cup of coffee, and bantered with another deputy about their plans for the weekend. The arrest of Liam O'Connell was already just an anecdote, a story he would tell about a crazy medic who thought he was above the law. He had no idea that the piece of paper he had just signed was not a shield, but a time bomb. Liam had been in the holding cell for nearly 2 hours when the guard's footsteps echoed down the hall. The lock turned with a loud clang, and the heavy door swung open. "O'Connell, your lawyer's here." He was led to a small, sterile room with a metal table and 2 chairs. A woman was sitting at the table, a leather briefcase open beside her. She looked to be in her late 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an expression that radiated a no-nonsense competence. She wore a dark gray pantsuit that was professional yet understated. She stood as he entered. "Liam, I'm Evelyn Reed," she said, shaking his hand. Her grip was firm. "Your union president called me directly. I came as soon as I heard. Please, sit down." Liam sat, the exhaustion of the past few hours settling over him like a heavy blanket. "Thank you for coming." "Don't thank me yet," she said, her tone brisk but not unkind. She pulled a legal pad from her briefcase. "I've already spoken to your partner, Maria. She gave me a brief rundown. Now I need to hear it from you. Everything. From the moment you got the call. Don't leave a single detail out, no matter how small you think it is." For the next 45 minutes, Liam recounted the morning's events. He described the call, the patient's critical condition, the positioning of the ambulance, Deputy Riley's arrival, his escalating demands, the fabricated assault, and the arrest. He was methodical, precise, relaying the sequence of events with the same clinical accuracy he would use to describe a patient's symptoms. Evelyn Reed listened intently, her pen flying across the legal pad. She only interrupted a few times, asking for clarification on specific points. When he demanded you move the ambulance, what were your exact words? Did he activate his body camera before he made contact with you? Who else was in the room and where were they standing? When he finished, she tapped her pen on the notepad for a moment, her eyes narrowed in thought. He wrote in the probable cause affidavit that you shoved him with your medical kit, she said, having already obtained and reviewed the document. He claims you were belligerent and refused to identify yourself. That's a complete lie, Liam said, his voice hard. He's the one who was aggressive. He's the one who grabbed me. I never laid a hand on him. I believe you, Evelyn said simply. I've been doing this for 20 years. I've represented dozens of first responders. I know the difference between a legitimate arrest and a contempt of cop arrest. This stinks to high heaven. She leaned forward, her expression turning serious. This Deputy Riley made a catastrophic mistake. He let his ego write a check his facts can't cash, and he was stupid enough to put it all in a sworn statement. She explained the legal situation. He was being charged with felony battery on a law enforcement officer and misdemeanor obstruction of justice. The felony charge was serious, carrying a potential prison sentence. His paramedic license would be suspended pending the outcome, meaning he was off the job, without pay, indefinitely. This is my career, Liam said, the full weight of the situation crashing down on him. My life. Our goal is not just to get these charges dropped, Evelyn said, her voice filled with a steely resolve. It's to make sure this never happens to you or anyone else again. This report, she tapped the copy of the affidavit on the table, is a work of fiction. But he made one critical error. He forgot about the one witness that can't lie, can't be intimidated, and has a perfect memory. His own body camera. She explained their strategy. First, they would get him released on his own recognizance or a minimal bond at his first appearance tomorrow morning. Second, she would file a formal demand for discovery, specifically for all body camera and dash camera footage. His entire case is built on the claim that you physically assaulted him, she continued. The moment that video shows he initiated contact and that you never shoved him, his case evaporates. And when a sworn officer's case evaporates, it doesn't just disappear. It blows back on him. Filing a false police report is a crime. Perjury is a crime. What he did today wasn't just a bad arrest, it was illegal. For the first time since the handcuffs had clicked around his wrists, Liam felt a sliver of hope. Evelyn Reed wasn't just a lawyer, she was a fighter. She saw the chessboard with perfect clarity. What about my patient? Liam asked, the question that had been haunting him. Mr. Henderson, is he okay? Evelyn's expression softened slightly. Maria told me the second unit got there and transported him to Lakeland Regional. He's in the ICU. It was touch and go. The delay, it didn't help. She paused. That's the other part of this. This isn't just about a false arrest, Liam. This is about a police officer interfering with emergency medical services. And in Florida, that has very serious consequences. She closed her briefcase with a decisive snap. Let's get you out of here. The real fight starts now. The first 24 hours after Liam's release were a surreal limbo. He was home, but he wasn't free. The felony charge hung over him like a storm cloud, and the terms of his release forbade him from returning to work. His uniform, the one he had worn with pride for 15 years, was now evidence, sealed in a bag at the station. He spent the day on the phone, first with his frantic parents, then with his captain at the fire department, who offered his full support but was bound by official procedure. The news was already spreading through the tight-knit community of first responders, a shockwave of disbelief and anger. But his primary concern remained with his patient. On Tuesday morning, he got a call from Maria. Her voice was strained. "I just got off the phone with one of the ICU nurses at Lakeland Regional," she said. "It's not good, Liam." He braced himself. "What happened?" "Mr. Henderson is on a ventilator," she explained. "The prolonged hypoglycemia caused a massive stress event on his system. He had a seizure in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. When they got him there, they found he'd also suffered a mild heart attack, probably triggered by the seizure and the metabolic distress." Liam felt sick. A simple, treatable diabetic emergency had cascaded into a life-threatening crisis. A call that should have ended with the patient sitting up and drinking a glass of orange juice had resulted in an ICU admission and a ventilator. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, exactly why. "The delay," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes," Maria confirmed. "The ER doctor told the second crew that every minute counts in a situation like that. The brain needs glucose. When it doesn't get it, it starts to shut down, and other systems follow. We were reversing it. He was coming back. And then we were stopped." The minutes they lost were not just tick marks on a clock. They were units of cellular death in the patient's brain and heart muscle. There was the time Riley spent arguing, the time spent on the fabricated arrest, the time Liam was pulled away from the patient, and the crucial minutes Maria waited, alone, for the second ambulance to arrive. In total, nearly 15 minutes of critical care had been stolen from Mr. Henderson, sacrificed at the altar of a deputy's ego. "His wife, does she know what happened?" Liam asked. "She knows her husband's paramedic was arrested in the middle of treating him," Maria said, her voice tight with anger. "She's devastated, confused. She keeps asking what she did wrong by calling 911. That was the question that would haunt Liam. A citizen had called for help in a moment of crisis, trusting the system to respond. Instead, the system had turned on itself, the public servants battling each other while the person they were sworn to protect suffered the consequences. The news about Mr. Henderson's condition dramatically changed the legal calculus. This was no longer just a case of false arrest and a damaged reputation. This was now a case with a tangible, severely harmed victim. When Evelyn Reed heard the news, her resolve hardened. "This is the linchpin, Liam," she said over the phone later that day. "A jury can sympathize with a paramedic being wrongfully arrested, but when they see the real-world medical harm that resulted from that arrest, sympathy turns to outrage. Deputy Riley didn't just violate your civil rights, his actions nearly killed a man." She explained that this development opened the door for a much larger civil action. They weren't just fighting the criminal charges anymore, they were going on the offensive. The county is now liable for Mr. Henderson's medical bills, his long-term care, and the pain and suffering caused by that deputy's reckless indifference, she said. And they are liable for what he did to you. He acted under the color of law, using the authority given to him by the Polk County Sheriff's Office. That makes them responsible for his actions. The patient's family, overwhelmed and grappling with the sudden tragedy, had already been in contact with their own attorney. Evelyn reached out immediately, coordinating their efforts. The two legal battles would proceed on parallel tracks, the state's flimsy criminal case against Liam and their own looming federal civil rights lawsuit against the county. The stakes had been raised to a level Liam could never have imagined. A life hung in the balance, a family's future was in jeopardy, and a county's finances were now at risk. All because one deputy on a sunny Sunday morning could not tolerate being told that a dying man was more important than his parking spot. The lie Deputy Riley had written on that arrest affidavit was no longer just an attack on one man's integrity. It was a ticking bomb that threatened to blow a multi-million-dollar hole in the county budget. 3 weeks after the arrest, the criminal case against Liam was proceeding at a glacial pace. The state attorney's office, operating solely on Deputy Riley's sworn affidavit, had formally filed the charges. Evelyn Reed had entered a plea of not guilty on Liam's behalf and filed a sweeping discovery motion, but the prosecutor was dragging their feet on releasing the body camera footage. It was a common tactic: delay, hoping the defendant would lose their nerve and accept a plea deal. But Evelyn wasn't waiting. While the state's case languished, she was meticulously building a federal one. She spent weeks gathering evidence: Maria's sworn testimony, dispatch logs that showed the timeline of the call, Polk County Fire Rescue's protocols on scene safety, and Liam's unblemished 15-year service record. Most damningly, she obtained Mr. Henderson's complete medical file, a nearly 200-page document that detailed his catastrophic decline. His doctors provided sworn statements, with one ER physician writing, "The significant delay in definitive pre-hospital care was a primary contributing factor to the patient's subsequent cardiac arrest and neurological damage. The outcome would likely have been substantially different had treatment not been interrupted." With all the pieces in place, Evelyn drafted the federal complaint. It was a work of precise, methodical legal aggression. It named Deputy Evan Riley as the primary defendant, but it also named the Polk County Sheriff and the county itself, arguing a pattern of inadequate training and supervision that allowed an officer like Riley to operate without consequence. The lawsuit alleged multiple violations of Liam's constitutional rights: false arrest under the Fourth Amendment, malicious prosecution, and a violation of his 14th Amendment right to practice his profession without undue government interference. It detailed in clinical and devastating language how Riley had fabricated the assault claim and how his actions had directly led to the near death of a patient under Liam's care. And then there was the demand for damages. Evelyn and a team of forensic accountants had calculated the cost. There was Liam's lost income, the damage to his professional reputation, the emotional distress, and the potential for future lost earnings. Then there were the punitive damages, designed not just to compensate, but to punish the county and deter future misconduct. The final number was staggering. The lawsuit, O'Connell versus Riley et al., demanded $19.6 million. The day the lawsuit was electronically filed, it sent an immediate shockwave through the county government building. The local news media, alerted by a press release from Evelyn's office, picked up the story immediately. The evening news led with the headline, "Paramedic arrested while saving man's life, sues county for nearly $20 million." The story was explosive. It had everything: a heroic first responder, a patient fighting for his life, and a police officer accused of a shocking abuse of power. The narrative was simple and powerful, and it put the sheriff's office in an impossible public relations position. The sheriff, a politician up for re-election in a year, was forced to hold a press conference. He offered a tight-lipped defensive statement saying he stood by his deputy, but that the incident was under internal review. He refused to answer questions about the body camera footage. The lawsuit was a declaration of war. It meant they were not settling for a quiet apology and a dropped charge. They were aiming for systemic change and full accountability. The $19.6 million figure wasn't just an arbitrary number, it was a signal. It was a figure so large that the county's insurance carriers and risk management department would immediately sit up and take notice. It ensured that this would not be swept under the rug. It guaranteed that the highest levels of county government would be forced to look at Deputy Riley's actions and decide if one deputy's ego was worth a potential 8-figure payout. For Liam, seeing the lawsuit in black and white was a surreal experience. He had never thought of himself as someone who would sue anyone, let alone his own county. But this wasn't about personal enrichment. It was about justice. It was about the principle that a paramedic's duty to their patient could not be overruled by the whim of a police officer on a power trip. "They will fight this," Evelyn warned him. "They will try to paint you as the problem. They will dig into your past, looking for anything they can use. They will try to break you. Are you ready for that?" Liam thought of Mr. Henderson, lying in a hospital bed, his life irrevocably altered. He thought of the patient's wife, her face a mask of grief. And he thought of the next paramedic who might find themselves in the same impossible position. "I'm ready," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Let them try." The filing of the federal lawsuit had the intended effect. It forced the county to take the situation seriously. Within a week, the county's legal department, a team of overworked and underpaid attorneys accustomed to dealing with slip and fall claims, realized they were out of their depth. The case was immediately handed off to the county's insurance carrier, which, in turn, hired a powerful, high-priced law firm from Tampa that specialized in defending municipalities against civil rights claims. The lead attorney for the defense was a man named Marcus Thorne, known for his aggressive, take-no-prisoners litigation style. His strategy was predictable: delay, deflect, and attack the plaintiff's credibility. His first move was to file a motion to dismiss the lawsuit, arguing that Deputy Riley was protected by qualified immunity, a controversial legal doctrine that shields government officials from liability unless they have violated a clearly established constitutional right. Evelyn Reed was prepared for this. In her response, she argued forcefully that the right to be free from arrest without probable cause was as clearly established as any right in the Constitution, and that fabricating evidence to create probable cause was a textbook example of an officer acting outside the bounds of the law. While the legal motions played out, the pressure was mounting behind the scenes. The insurance company's risk analysts were looking at the case, and they were nervous. The optics were terrible, and the potential for a massive jury verdict was very real. They instructed Marcus Thorne to approach Evelyn with a settlement offer, a nuisance value payment designed to make the problem go away quickly and quietly. The meeting took place in a sterile conference room at Thorne's firm. The air was thick with tension. Thorne, a man with a tailored suit and a condescending smile, began the meeting with a long speech about the financial pressures on the county and the unpredictability of juries. He spoke of Deputy Riley as a dedicated young officer who had made a split-second judgment call in a tense situation. Evelyn listened patiently, letting him finish his performance. "The county is prepared to offer Mr. O'Connell a settlement to resolve all claims," Thorne said, leaning back in his chair as if bestowing a great favor. "We will ensure the criminal charges are dropped, and we will offer him a cash payment of $25,000. Evelyn didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. She let the number hang in the air for a moment, letting its inadequacy sink in. $25,000. It was an insult. It wouldn't even cover Liam's lost wages so far, let alone the damage to his career or the emotional trauma of the arrest. It was a number designed to test their resolve, to see if they were serious. "Marcus," Evelyn said, her voice dangerously calm, "is that a serious offer, or are you just practicing your stand-up routine?" Thorne's smile faltered. "It's a very generous offer considering Mr. O'Connell's insubordinate behavior." "Let me be clear," Evelyn said, leaning forward and placing her hands flat on the polished table. "My client was a decorated Navy corpsman and a 15-year veteran paramedic. He was arrested in the middle of rendering life-saving care based on a lie your client told because his feelings were hurt. That lie has resulted in a man fighting for his life in the ICU. You are not dealing with a case of insubordination. You are dealing with a case of malicious prosecution, false imprisonment, and a catastrophic abuse of power." She stood up, gathering her things. "We reject your offer, emphatically. We will not be settling this case for nuisance value. My client doesn't want hush money. He wants justice, and we will get it." She looked Thorne directly in the eye. "And Marcus, I am still waiting for that body camera footage. The judge signed the order compelling you to produce it a week ago. My motion for contempt is drafted and ready to file. You have 48 hours to turn over that video. If I don't have it by then, your next conversation will be with the judge, explaining why you should not be sanctioned for hiding evidence." With that, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving Marcus Thorne sitting alone at the head of the table, his condescending smile completely gone. The message had been sent. They would not be bought off. They would not be intimidated. They wanted the truth. And the truth was on a memory card sitting in an evidence locker at the Polk County Sheriff's Office. The clock was now ticking on the county's web of lies. True to Evelyn's threat, 48 hours later, a courier delivered a small padded envelope to her office. Inside was a flash drive. It was labeled simply, Riley, EBWC footage. Incident number 23-18759. This was it, the objective witness, the one piece of evidence that could either corroborate Deputy Riley's sworn statement or expose it as a complete fabrication. Evelyn called Liam and asked him to come to her office. "I want you to see this with me," she said. "It's your story. You should be the first to see how it was recorded." An hour later, they sat together in front of her large computer monitor. Liam's heart was pounding. He had replayed the events of that morning 1,000 times in his mind, but he was about to see it from a new perspective, through the eyes of the man who arrested him. Evelyn inserted the flash drive, clicked on the video file, and the screen flickered to life. The video began with the shaky, hurried view of Deputy Riley getting out of his patrol car. The audio was clear. The sizzle of the police radio, the crunch of his boots on the asphalt. The timestamp in the corner of the screen confirmed the time and date. He walked toward the house, and the camera's perspective followed his gaze directly to the ambulance. "Son of a bitch," Riley muttered under his breath, his first words of the encounter an expression of pure annoyance. "Blocking the whole damn street." He entered the house. The video showed Liam on his knees, working on the patient. The audio captured Liam's calm, professional voice, identifying himself and explaining the medical situation. Then it captured Riley's first command. "I need you to move your vehicle." They watched, mesmerized, as the entire confrontation unfolded exactly as Liam had described. The video showed Liam's repeated, patient explanations about patient care and scene safety. It showed his calm demeanor, his unwavering focus on Mr. Henderson. In stark contrast, it showed Deputy Riley's growing agitation, his voice getting louder, his body language becoming more aggressive and domineering. The camera captured Maria's concerned expression and the terrified face of Mr. Henderson's wife in the background. It was all there, a perfect recording of the deputy's escalating anger. Then came the critical moment, the alleged assault. Liam and Evelyn leaned closer to the screen. The footage showed Riley stepping over Liam. It showed Liam, still on his knees, making no aggressive movements. His medical kit was on the floor, untouched. The video then showed Riley reaching down and grabbing Liam's arm. At that moment, Riley's own arm blocked the camera's view, but the audio was crystal clear. "Don't touch me," Liam's voice said, firm but not yelling. "You're under arrest," Riley snarled back. "Under arrest for what?" "Assault on a law enforcement officer. You shoved me with your bag when I approached." Liam let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. He just made it up, right there, out of thin air. The video was incontrovertible. There was no shove, there was no assault, there was no belligerence or aggression from Liam. There was only a paramedic doing his job and a deputy sheriff losing his temper and then fabricating a felony to justify his actions. The camera had not only captured the events, it had captured the creation of the lie itself. Evelyn was silent for a long moment, a slow, triumphant smile spreading across her face. She hit pause, freezing the frame on Riley's furious face. "This is it," she said, her voice filled with a cold fury. "This is the whole case. We just won." She explained the legal significance. The video didn't just exonerate Liam, it proved beyond any doubt that Deputy Riley had filed a false police report and committed perjury. He had lied in a sworn affidavit. The foundation of the state's criminal case was not just weak, it was a criminal act in itself. And for the federal lawsuit, this video was the silver bullet. It eviscerated any claim of qualified immunity and exposed the county to massive liability. "What happens now?" Liam asked, a profound sense of relief washing over him. Evelyn's smile sharpened. "Now we go on the attack. I'm sending a copy of this to the state attorney with a demand for an immediate dismissal of all charges. And I'm sending a copy to Marcus Thorne with a note that says, "Let's talk about my client's deposition of your lying, perjuring deputy." She turned to Liam, her eyes blazing. He thought he was writing your career's obituary. He didn't realize he was recording his own. The deposition of Deputy Evan Riley took place 2 weeks later. The atmosphere in the conference room was electric with unspoken hostility. Liam was there, sitting beside Evelyn Reed, his expression impassive. Across the long mahogany table sat Deputy Riley, looking pale and nervous, flanked by the county's attorney, Marcus Thorne. A court reporter was positioned at the end of the table, her fingers poised over her stenotype machine, ready to transcribe every word into a permanent sworn record. Depositions are a critical part of the discovery process, a chance for attorneys to question witnesses under oath before a trial. Evelyn's strategy was simple. She was not there to gather information. She already had the truth on video. She was there to force Riley to either admit his lie under oath or to commit perjury again, digging his legal grave even deeper. She began gently, asking about his training, his years of service, the standard procedures for responding to a medical call. Riley answered with a forced confidence, trying to project the image of a competent professional officer. Thorne occasionally objected to a question, but for the most part he sat in tense silence. Then Evelyn moved to the events of that Sunday morning. She had him walk her through his arrival, his initial assessment of the scene. And in your sworn arrest affidavit, you stated that paramedic O'Connell immediately became argumentative and belligerent, Evelyn said, picking up the document. Is that correct? Yes, that's correct, Riley said, his voice steady. And you wrote that he shouted, "I'm not moving my truck for you." Did he say that? Yes, he did, Riley affirmed. Evelyn made a small note on her pad. She continued this line of questioning for another 20 minutes, having Riley confirm, one by one, every lie he had written in his report. His refusal to provide ID, his aggressive posture, and finally, the assault itself. Deputy Riley, describe for me in your own words exactly how paramedic O'Connell assaulted you, Evelyn said, her voice even. Riley cleared his throat. He picked up his medical kit, a large, heavy bag, and he shoved it into my chest. He struck me with it. And this caused you to stumble backward? Yes. And you feared for your safety? Yes, I did. His actions were aggressive and unpredictable. Evelyn paused, letting the silence hang in the room. She looked at Riley, then at Thorne, then back at Riley. Deputy, are you aware that you are under oath today? That lying under oath is a felony called perjury? Objection, Thorne snapped. Counsel is being argumentative. Noted, Evelyn said dismissively. Deputy, please answer the question. Yes, I'm aware, Riley mumbled. Good. Evelyn stood up and walked to a large television screen at the end of the room. She picked up a remote control. I'd now like to play a short video. It is the footage from your own body-worn camera from the incident in question. Let's watch it together, shall we? A flicker of panic crossed Riley's face. Thorne shot to his feet. Objection! This is improper! Ambush tactics! Ambush, Marcus? Evelyn shot back, her voice dripping with scorn. This is your own client's video, which you produced to me in discovery. I am simply asking him to comment on it. Now please, sit down. Thorne, knowing he had no legal grounds to stop her, reluctantly sat. Evelyn pressed play. The room was silent as the video played out on the large screen. The audio was crisp and clear. They all watched Riley's arrival. They heard his muttered curse about the ambulance. They heard Liam's calm, professional voice. They heard Riley's own voice growing louder, more agitated, more demanding. They heard him order Liam to move the truck. But the words Riley had sworn Liam had shouted, "I'm not moving my truck for you," were nowhere to be found. They heard Liam explain where his ID was, but his supposed refusal, "You're not getting anything from me," was also absent. Finally, they reached the critical moment. Everyone in the room leaned forward. The video clearly showed Liam on his knees, not moving. It showed Riley initiating all physical contact. There was no bag being picked up. There was no shove. There was no stumble. There was only the sound of Riley snarling, You assaulted me! Evelyn paused the video. She turned to face the deputy, who was now ashen-faced, staring at the frozen image on the screen. Deputy Riley, she said, her voice like ice. The video we just watched does not appear to show an assault. In fact, it does not show you being touched by Mr. O'Connell in any way. It shows you grabbing him. It shows you inventing the assault claim out of thin air. So I will ask you again under oath. Did paramedic Liam O'Connell shove you with his medical bag? Riley stared at the screen. He looked at Thorne, who offered no help. He looked at Liam, whose gaze was unwavering. He was trapped. The camera had been his witness, and it had testified against him. He swallowed hard. I may have been mistaken in my recollection of the exact sequence of events, he stammered. Mistaken? Evelyn pounced. Deputy, you wrote a sworn affidavit. You subjected my client to arrest, incarceration, and felony charges based on this mistaken recollection. Are you now changing your sworn testimony? Riley was silent. He looked down at his hands on the table. He was broken. The lie, so bold and confident on paper, had crumbled into dust under the unblinking eye of the camera. The deposition was over. The case was over. And Evan Riley's career as a law enforcement officer was over. He just didn't know it yet. The fallout from Deputy Riley's disastrous deposition was immediate. Marcus Thorne, the county's attorney, knew his case was not just damaged, it was obliterated. He now had a client who had been caught on video and under oath, contradicting his own sworn police report. The criminal case against Liam was a dead letter. Evelyn's motion to dismiss was granted by a judge the following week, with the prosecutor citing a lack of evidence. The words "not guilty" were formally entered into the record, but it was a hollow victory. The real battle was the $19.6 million lawsuit, and the county was now defending it with no ammunition and a mountain of liability. The insurance company, panicking at the prospect of a jury watching that body cam video, forced the county to agree to mediation. Mediation is a form of alternative dispute resolution where a neutral third party, often a retired judge, helps the two sides negotiate a settlement to avoid a costly and unpredictable trial. They met in the office of a highly respected federal mediator in Orlando. The mediator was a man named Judge Harrison, a stern, no-nonsense jurist who had seen it all in his 30 years on the bench. He started the day by putting the two parties in separate conference rooms, shuttling back and forth between them to hear their positions. In one room sat Liam and Evelyn Reed. Evelyn laid out their case with cold, hard facts. The video, the perjured testimony from the deposition, the unimpeachable medical evidence of the harm done to Mr. Henderson, and the clear violation of Liam's civil rights. Their position was simple. They were prepared to go to trial, and they were confident a jury would award them a verdict in the tens of millions. In the other room, Marcus Thorne did his best to salvage an indefensible position. He argued that while Deputy Riley may have made mistakes in his report, his initial intent was to secure the scene. He tried to claim that the county had already taken steps to retrain the deputy, and that the whole incident was an unfortunate misunderstanding. He made a new settlement offer, $250,000. When Judge Harrison brought that offer back to Evelyn and Liam, Evelyn laughed out loud. Judge, with all due respect, they are not taking this seriously. Send them back a message from me. We will see them in court. The morning session ended in a stalemate. After a lunch break, Judge Harrison decided a different approach was needed. He called Marcus Thorne and the two senior county attorneys into his private office without their client. He closed the door. Gentlemen, he began, his voice devoid of any legal pleasantries, I'm going to be very blunt with you. I have reviewed the body camera footage. I have read the deposition transcript of your deputy, and I have read the medical reports for the patient. You are going to lose this case. He paused, letting his words sink in. And you are not just going to lose. You are going to lose in a way that will be catastrophic for this county. A jury is going to watch that video. They are going to see a young, arrogant officer bully a paramedic who is calmly trying to save a man's life. They are going to see him fabricate a felony charge out of thin air. Then they are going to hear from the ER doctor who will testify, under oath, that the delay your deputy caused nearly killed that man. He leaned forward, his eyes boring into the attorney's. This isn't a case about a misunderstanding. This is a case about a government agent who lied under oath to cover up an abuse of power. A jury will not just be angry, they will be offended. They will want to punish you. And in federal court, they have the power to do it with a verdict that will make your eyes water. He stood up and walked to the window. Forget the $19.6 million they are asking for. A jury in this district, after seeing that video, could come back with a number even higher than that. And that doesn't even include Ms. Reed's attorney's fees, which you will also be ordered to pay. He turned back to them. Your insurance carrier will pay the verdict, yes. But the political fallout for the sheriff and the county commission will be immense. The headlines will be brutal. You have one last chance to control the damage. Go back into that room and make a real offer. Settle this case today. Because if you walk out of this office without a deal, the next time you discuss a settlement, it will be after a jury has already financially strip-mined your county. The warning was stark and unequivocal. The color drained from the faces of the county attorneys. They had been told, by a respected retired federal judge, that their case was a complete and utter disaster. The fantasy that they could somehow defend the indefensible was gone. They walked out of the judge's office and back to their conference room. The negotiation was about to get serious. The final hours of the mediation were a tense, grueling negotiation. Judge Harrison shuttled back and forth, carrying offers and counteroffers. Marcus Thorne, his confidence shattered, was now just a messenger for the panicked insurance adjusters on the phone. The numbers began to climb rapidly. From $250,000 to $1 million, from $1 million to $5 million. Evelyn Reed held firm, rejecting each offer. It's not just about the money, Judge, she kept repeating. We need non-monetary relief. We need policy changes. We need to know that the county is going to fix the problem that allowed this to happen. Finally, as the sun began to set, they reached a number. But it was tied to a set of sweeping, non-negotiable conditions that Evelyn had drafted. The final settlement was a landmark agreement. The county agreed to pay Liam O'Connell a sum that, while confidential, was acknowledged to be one of the largest pretrial settlements for a wrongful arrest in the state's history, a figure that made the initial $19.6 million demand seem less like a negotiating tactic and more like a prophecy. A separate, substantial settlement was reached with Mr. Henderson's family to cover his lifelong medical care and suffering. But the money was only part of the victory. The agreement mandated a complete overhaul of the Polk County Sheriff's Office's policies regarding interactions with other first responders. Key provisions included mandatory annual joint training exercises between deputies and fire rescue personnel, focusing on de-escalation and unified command at emergency scenes. A new explicit policy stating that at a medical emergency, the senior medical professional on scene has authority over patient care, and law enforcement directives that interfere with that care are prohibited unless there is an active, violent threat. The implementation of an early warning system to flag deputies who accumulate multiple complaints of unprofessional conduct, triggering mandatory retraining and psychological review. Any arrest of an on-duty first responder would trigger an automatic, immediate internal affairs investigation to be reviewed directly by the sheriff. The settlement was a resounding victory, a public admission of wrongdoing without using the words. For Liam, the policy changes were the most important part. They were a shield for every paramedic and EMT who would come after him. The ink was barely dry on the settlement agreement when the internal affairs investigation into Evan Riley, which had been languishing for months, suddenly kicked into high gear. Faced with the undeniable video evidence and the massive financial fallout, the sheriff had no choice. 2 weeks after the mediation, Deputy Evan Riley was summoned to the sheriff's office. He was stripped of his badge and his service weapon. He was fired officially for conduct unbecoming an officer, violating the public trust and filing a false official report. The termination letter was a public record, and the local news reported it with fervor. The story of the arrogant young deputy who had cost the county millions and lost his job became a cautionary tale. His attempt to dominate and humiliate one man had resulted in his own public disgrace. The state attorney's office, which had so readily accepted Riley's lies to prosecute Liam, was now faced with a politically embarrassing situation. Under pressure from the media and public outcry, they launched a criminal investigation into Riley's conduct. 3 months later, a grand jury indicted former Deputy Evan Riley on 1 count of perjury and 1 count of filing a false police report, the very crimes he had committed to justify Liam's arrest. The wheels of justice, which had once threatened to crush an innocent man, were now turning slowly but surely toward the one who was truly guilty. Liam watched these events unfold with a sense of weary vindication. The money would help secure his future, but it couldn't erase the memory of the handcuffs or the holding cell. The real healing came from knowing that the system, however flawed and slow, had ultimately been forced to correct itself. The price of Evan Riley's lie had been paid not just in dollars, but in the currency of institutional change. The culture of automatic deference to a badge over a paramedic's oath had been dealt a severe blow, and the ripples of that impact were just beginning to spread. The case of O'Connell versus Riley became more than just a local news story. It became a statewide rallying cry for first responders. Medical unions and professional associations across Florida seized upon the incident as a perfect, horrifying example of the dangers their members faced from law enforcement overreach. The body camera footage, which Evelyn Reed's office released to the media after the settlement, went viral. It was played in fire stations and ambulance bays across the country, a chilling real-life training video on what can go wrong when a police officer's ego goes unchecked. The political pressure was immense. A bipartisan group of state legislators, spurred on by the powerful fire and EMS unions, saw an opportunity for meaningful reform. They drafted a new piece of legislation aimed at preventing a similar incident from ever happening again. The bill was unofficially known as Liam's Law, though its formal title was the First Responder Shield Act. The proposed law was simple but powerful. It legally codified the principle that on the scene of a medical emergency, the senior licensed medical provider is in charge of patient care. It made it a criminal misdemeanor for any individual, including a law enforcement officer, to intentionally or knowingly interfere with a first responder who is actively providing emergency medical treatment, unless that first responder is committing a clear and obvious crime. The law created a legal shield, giving paramedics and EMTs the explicit statutory authority to refuse orders that would compromise patient care. Liam was asked to testify before the State Senate committee reviewing the bill. He flew to Tallahassee, dressed not in his uniform, but in a simple suit. He sat before the panel of powerful lawmakers, his voice quiet but unwavering as he recounted the events of that Sunday morning. He didn't speak with anger or bitterness. He spoke as a medical professional, explaining the critical importance of the golden hour in trauma care and the delicate, time-sensitive nature of treating a hypoglycemic event. When I was treating Mr. Henderson, he told the committee, my only focus was on him. My training, my experience, and my oath demanded that I make his life my sole priority. I was arrested because that priority conflicted with a deputy's desire to park his car. No paramedic should ever have to choose between their patient's life and their own freedom. We are not asking for special treatment. We are asking for the legal clarity to do the jobs you have trained and licensed us to do. His testimony was powerful. It put a human face on a legal principle. After him, Mr. Henderson's wife testified, her voice thick with emotion as she described watching her husband nearly die while a paramedic was handcuffed and led away. The bill passed both the House and the Senate with overwhelming, near-unanimous support. No politician wanted to be on record voting against protecting paramedics. The governor of Florida signed it into law in a public ceremony on the steps of the state capitol. He invited Liam O'Connell and his family to stand beside him as he signed the bill. The First Responder Shield Act became a model for the nation. Other states began looking at their own statutes, or lack thereof, regarding the protection of medical personnel. The case and its legislative aftermath were written up in law journals and EMS publications. The story of what happened in that small living room in Polk County had become a catalyst for a national conversation about the roles, responsibilities, and authority on an emergency scene. It was a profound systemic change born from a single moment of injustice. Evan Riley, in his arrogant attempt to assert his authority over one paramedic, had inadvertently triggered a legal revolution that empowered thousands. His name would be forever linked not with the power he craved, but with the law that was created to protect others from men exactly like him. The legacy of that morning was no longer just about a wrongful arrest. It was about the fundamental right to save a life without interference, a right that was now etched into the laws of the state of Florida. Years passed. The dust from the lawsuit and the legislative battle settled, but the landscape had been permanently altered. Liam O'Connell eventually returned to work at Station 4, back in the same ambulance, running the same kinds of calls with his partner, Maria. On the surface, things were the same. The siren still wailed, the diesel engine still rumbled, and the relentless rhythm of crisis continued unabated. But for Liam, something fundamental had shifted. He carried the scars of his ordeal not on his skin, but in the quiet, watchful corners of his mind. Every time a police car pulled up to one of his scenes, he felt a familiar spike of adrenaline, a tensing in his gut. He found himself overly cautious in his interactions with law enforcement, his language meticulously neutral, his actions carefully considered. The easy camaraderie he once shared with the men and women in blue had been replaced by a guarded professionalism. He had won his battle, but the wariness remained. His case became a fixture in training academies. The body camera footage was now required viewing for every new police recruit and every paramedic student in the state of Florida, and in many other states as well. It was presented as a case study in what not to do. Instructors would pause the video and ask, "Where did Deputy Riley make his first mistake?" They would analyze Liam's calm, de-escalating responses. They would debate the fine line between lawful orders and unlawful interference. The 9 minutes of footage from that Sunday morning became one of the most effective training tools in modern emergency services, a stark lesson in the catastrophic consequences of ego. The Legal Defense Fund, established with a portion of Liam's settlement, grew into a national resource, providing support for first responders who faced retaliation for prioritizing patient care. It funded legal battles for EMTs disciplined for refusing to let police interview a critical patient, and for firefighters who were written up for blocking traffic to protect an accident scene. Liam's story became a beacon, proof that fighting back, even when it seemed hopeless, could lead to victory. Evan Riley, the man who started it all, was convicted of perjury. He was sentenced to 2 years of probation and would forever be barred from working in law enforcement. He faded into obscurity, a disgraced footnote in a story that had grown much larger than him. He became a symbol of a type of policing that was slowly, painfully being reformed. Mr. Henderson, the patient at the center of it all, survived. He spent weeks in the hospital and months in rehabilitation. He never fully recovered. The neurological damage left him with a permanent tremor in his hands and a mild cognitive impairment. He became a quiet but powerful advocate for the First Responder Shield Act, his presence at legislative hearings a silent, damning testament to the real-world cost of interference. Every year, on the anniversary of the incident, he sent a simple card to Liam at the fire station. It always contained the same 2 words: "Thank you." For Liam, that card was more meaningful than any settlement check. It was a reminder of why he had made his stand, a reminder of the life that was almost lost. In the quiet moments, late at night between calls, Liam would often reflect on the chain of events. He would try to understand the psychology of a man like Evan Riley. What drove him to make such a destructive choice? It wasn't simple malice, It was something more complex and perhaps more common, a deep-seated insecurity masked by a uniform and a badge. Riley was a young man entrusted with immense authority, yet he lacked the wisdom or maturity to wield it. In Liam, he saw not a fellow professional, but a challenge. Liam's calm competence, his refusal to be flustered or intimidated, was perceived as a direct threat to Riley's fragile sense of control. The lie about the assault wasn't a calculated legal tactic. It was a desperate, reflexive act of a man who felt his power slipping away and needed to reclaim it by any means necessary, even if it meant destroying another person. His actions were a symptom of a culture that sometimes teaches officers that their authority must be absolute rather than contextual. Could Liam have done anything differently? Perhaps he could have been more deferential, more placating. He could have abandoned his patient for a moment to move the ambulance, satisfying the deputy's ego to avoid a confrontation. But that would have been a betrayal of his oath. It would have meant placing a police officer's convenience above a patient's life. The hard lesson was that sometimes doing the right thing guarantees conflict. The better protection, he realized, wasn't to change his own actions, but for the system to have better safeguards. Perhaps if every first responder wore a body camera, not just law enforcement, the truth would always have an impartial witness from every angle. Ultimately, the story is a testament to a simple, profound truth. Integrity is the bedrock of public service. It is the courage to prioritize duty over self-preservation, to hold fast to one's principles even when facing immense pressure. Liam's stand was not just for himself, but for the sanctity of the oath that all first responders take. It affirmed that in the chaotic theater of an emergency, the act of saving a life must be the highest law, superseding ego, bureaucracy, and even a misplaced show of authority. His victory was ensuring that the next paramedic, faced with the same impossible choice, would have the law, the policy, and his story standing behind them like a shield. What do you think is the most crucial element in preventing these kinds of power struggles between different branches of emergency services? Have you ever witnessed a situation where a professional had to risk their own standing to do the right thing? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and please support our channel so we can continue to bring these important stories to light.